This weekend, there is a too-close-to-call presidential election going on in Poland. It's seen as a crucial moment in the country that is pulling itself back from its previous authoritarian drift. And it's being complicated by President Trump's MAGA movement seeking to push right back in the opposite direction. So, let's discuss. The government of Poland is run by Donald Tusk's centre-right Civic Reform Party, which won power from the former populist Law and Justice Party and started the process of pulling Poland back into the European mainstream after a period of democratic backsliding. Tusk's government has been attempting to restore the rule of law, for instance re-establishing the independence of the judiciary, but much of its progress has been stalled by the current incumbent president, Andrzej Duda. Duda has been vetoing key bills to reform the National Council of the Judiciary or to remove skewed election laws. Politics is brutal, and according to Politico, that blockage has been eroding support for Tusk's coalition, as voters get frustrated with its inability to deliver on its election promises for democratic and for other reforms. So, for Tusk, it is a crucial next step to get a president aligned with the task of democratic renewal. And his party's candidate to do that is Rafał Trzaskowski. Now, the populist candidate is Karol Nawrocki. Not only does he get to be the candidate for his party, but it seems that in addition, he has become the latest standard bearer for Donald Trump's MAGA movement and its attempt to sweep Europe. Trump's allies have said that getting their man to become president is key to keeping any Trumpist momentum going across Europe after their favoured candidate George Simeon narrowly lost the election in Romania. Simeon, it turns out, was one of the voices raised at the first meeting of the Conservative Political Action Conference, CPAC, for Poland, fashioned after the United States version. He said that a loss in Poland could further sap the influence of the populist right across Central and Eastern Europe, a toppling domino that he believed could mean that Viktor Orban might be the next in the 2026 elections in Hungary. He said this: if MAGA really wants to go international, they need now a victory in Poland. Depending on who you listen to, it might be a surprise to find that Donald Trump's MAGA wants to be international. After all, it was only yesterday that US Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth was telling the Asia Security Forum in Singapore,
"The United States is not interested in the moralistic and preachy approach to foreign policy of the past. We're not here to pressure other countries to embrace or adopt policies or ideologies."
And yet here was the US Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem at CPAC Poland, very interested in the policies and ideology of the country of Poland. In her speech, she endorsed Nawrocki, she labelled other European leaders, in other words, let me remind you, the allies of the United States, as weak. She compared Trzaskowski to Joe Biden, which seems a bit of a stretch, and said that he would take protections away from the Polish people.
If you elected a leader that will work with President Donald J. Trump, the Polish people will have an ally strong that will ensure that you will be able to fight off enemies that do not share your values. You will continue to have a U.S. presence here, a military presence, Fort Trump, that we can work together for the security of both of our nations. And you will have equipment that is American-made, that is high quality.
So is that a suggestion that Poland won't have those things if the other side wins? Because that's kind of how it's sounding.
We do not have time for nice words. We do not have time to dance around the dangers that threaten our societies. Leadership has consequences.
Which all sounds pretty ominous, really. So much for Hegseth's comments about non-interference. So much for America encouraging Europe to stand on its own 2 feet against Russia while it supposedly turns its attention to the Asia-Pacific. Because no, the Trump administration, represented here by Kristi Noem, represented on other occasions by J.D. Vance and Elon Musk, well, it's not leaving Europe to its own devices. It is actively seeking to remake Europe in its own image. America's CPAC chairman Matt Schlapp said that this was now a movement of, well, he said conservatives, but really he means populists, because not to be confused with the real thing. They were engaged in a battle against globalists, who he described as the enemies of faith, family, and freedom. Other speakers called for an international coalition to be built around Trump. They spoke in apocalyptic terms about the future of the European Union and argued that it should be broken up. This, of course, is in line with the MAGA plan for Europe that we'd seen already, which I discussed in a previous video, where the Heritage Foundation, the authors of Project 2025, yes, that one that's currently transforming the United States, they had brought their European version of that to secret meetings of supporters across Europe as they gear up to make it a major movement there. John Eastman of the Claremont Institute also spoke at the CPAC Poland event. He's a member of the Project 2025 advisory board. He was also prosecuted in Georgia for his part in Trump's attempt to overthrow the result of the 2020 election. He said this: Poland is poised to play a critical role in defeating this threat to Western civilization, by which he meant the European Union and particularly its climate agenda. That is why the election this coming Sunday is so important, he continued, for whether Poland chooses to embrace the European Union from whence this threat comes, or stop it in its tracks, much like it stopped the Ottoman threat 3 centuries ago, we in the United States are watching with keen interest. Western civilization is in the balance. Freedom is in the balance. And indeed, the MAGA contingent in the US is indeed watching closely and bringing all its usual tactics. So, for example, Brian Mast, the Republican chair of the US House Foreign Affairs Committee, sent a letter to the European Commission President, Ursula von der Leyen, raising serious concerns about whether Brussels would guarantee fair elections in Poland. Bearing in mind the MAGA definition of fair elections being ones in which their preferred candidate wins. Some resources are clearly going into this operation, much of which will probably be hard to trace. So, for example, it's been reported that the TikTok algorithm in Poland has been pushing twice as much hard right political content to users ahead of the election. This was uncovered by an investigation by Global Witness, which found that there was twice as much far-right and nationalist content as any other political content. The same phenomenon had been observed ahead of the election in Romania, where TikTok served up nearly 3 times as much far-right content as all other political content, which at least turned out in that case not to be enough to actually swing the result of the election. How it's going to play out in Poland? Really, it's anybody's guess. The final opinion polls show the 2 candidates running neck and neck. So you'd think the Trump administration would probably roll out the big guns. Well, apparently CPAC organisers had hoped to host the US Vice President J.D. Vance. But recent experiences with Canada and Greenland and Australia have made the Trump administration a bit more wary of high-profile association with campaigns, as it seems to tend to backfire. So MAGA Poland had to make do with Kristi Noem instead. What this suggests is more movement towards money and training and behind-the-scenes influencing campaigns from the American populists who are seeking to implant their cause into European countries. Probably less and less direct connection between the American leading political figures to directly endorse the candidates. Clearly not because of Trump's supposed intent that the US doesn't interfere with the policies and values of other countries, because they love to do that, actually, but because of the fact that they lose when they're too visible in doing so. So that's at least part of the picture. Poland goes to the polls tomorrow. As with any election, of course, there are more issues and more concerns at stake that the various citizens of Poland may be concerned about and may be voting on. Any one of a dozen factors could end up being the thing that swings the final result. In any case, whatever happens, best wishes to the good people of Poland as they go to the polls. May the outcome and may the process of your election stand as a credit to your nation and to all of the aspirations of its people.